When do you start teaching music notation? And how deep do you get with young children? And to me, that really depends on what's your purpose in using music notation. Are you teaching them about whole notes so that you can have them march around the room and do some motion activities? Or are you teaching them about whole notes and quarter notes and half notes and all these other types of notational devices so that they can learn to read music? And I think that's the big thing. If you're teaching towards reading music, I would probably wait until later, maybe second grade. But if you're going to be teaching just using some motion activities, just to give them a foundation and to start them into considering music notation pre-K. I mean, you can certainly teach 4-year-olds about reading notes and understanding that a whole note gets 4 beats and those types of things without having to apply it to, oh, now we're going to do this on a recorder or on a piano or something. So be sure to consider your expectations of the students and the progress you want them to make and what your future goals are as you determine how you're going to use notation in your classroom setting. Now, I'm going to do another video talking about some motion activities that I've done with younger children in the past, and they'll tell you this works from kindergartners. I've done it with kindergartners all the way up through 5th, 6th graders, and they all enjoy it because it gets them active, it gets them around the room doing things. But right now I want to talk about the basics of notation. You've already had this discussed and described to you through the Education Portal videos, but I want to give a couple of tips on how to introduce notation to young children and try and help them to understand this concept, again, by using things that they already understand and know. So, first of all, we're going to talk about rhythm notation, and you have to be aware that there are 2 types of notation, rhythm notation and pitch notation. Rhythm just has to do with the duration of the sound and not how high or low the sound is. So, let's write this on the board. First we have rhythm notation. And I like to start out by comparing our note values to a pizza. So I'm going to draw a big pizza on the board here. Most students love pizza, no matter how old or young they are, so this is something they can get into really quickly. Now, if I have a pizza like this, how much pizza do I have? And almost always they're going to say the whole thing. And so now we can introduce that word, W-H-O-L-E. A lot of times they'll use that word in their language and they don't even know what it means, because we know this other word, whole, which is a hole in the ground, but they don't use this word a lot, or maybe don't understand the definition of it. So, this is a whole pizza. Okay, the whole thing's there, and now we can compare this, and it looks exactly the same, just smaller, to a whole note. And we'll tell them that a whole note gets 4 beats. And that's pretty much all they need to know at this point. And now I would do some motion exercises with them with the whole note, but I'll do that on another video because there's not enough time to do both. Okay, so now I'm going to take my pizza and I'm going to cut it like that. What did I do? Everybody will say, oh, you cut it in half. Okay, so now how many pieces of pizza do I have? I have 2. Okay, 1, 2, because 2 halves makes a whole. And you can start seeing how music is very mathematical with fractions and things. And over here I'm going to draw my half note, both versions of it. And now we need to start labeling things, okay? This here is called a note head. And again, these are things I'm only going to be doing with my 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders. Kindergartners don't need to know that this is a note head. They just need to know that the round circle without anything else is a whole note. Okay? Half notes have stems. And the stem can either go up on the right side or down on the left side. And I usually talk about this. That's not a half note, that's a lollipop. Sometimes we have this. That's a 9 or a Q, and that's not one of these. So you want your half notes to look like a D or a P. That's our goal. Okay, I need to grab something to erase here. Okay, so a half note, and again we can do some math, and most young students can even do this. What's half of 4? So this gets 2 beats. Alright, I can also erase this now because we know what that is. Okay, so the difference between a whole note and a half note. The half note has a stem, okay, going up or down. All right, now let's take our pizza again, chop it again. What have I done? I've cut it again, and now I have what? This is where they start to get confused because we're using hard words now. So, but I'll tell you, kindergartens can pick up on this, so don't be afraid to use difficult things with young children. Alright, now I have 4 pieces. I've cut it in half again. And what we want to do is trying to get them to say the word quarters, which that's not a term they use a lot except maybe with money. And even at a young age, money doesn't mean a whole lot to them. Quarters and nickels, it's all the same, it's just money. But we want to try and get them to say quarters, okay? So one of these pieces is how much? And eventually somebody's probably going to say quarter, and if they don't, then we'll teach them what a quarter is. So this is a quarter of the pizza right here. It's a pretty big piece. All of you would love to have a quarter of a pizza, okay? So we're going to come over here and we're going to draw our quarter notes and make them aware that a quarter note is filled in. Now this is a problem with chalk. And I know I'm using old school stuff here. Not too many teachers use chalk anymore. But chalk is white. And notes are never white. Notes are always black on white. So this is a little confusing to them. But just make sure that they know that a quarter note is filled in. And again, it has a stem just like a half note. So differentiate. What's the difference between a whole note and a half note? The stem. Whole note doesn't have it, half note does. What's the difference between a half note and a quarter note? Quarter note is filled in, half note is empty. Okay? And here's this big word that most of them won't know or know how to spell. Quarter note. And again, a quarter is a half of a half, so that's going to get 1 beat. Now this time we have to cut our pizza twice, so I'm going to cut it this way, and I'm going to cut it this way. Now how many pieces of pizza do we have? We have 8 pieces of pizza. So if I have one of these pieces, how much of my pizza is that? And this is an 1/8. And I would draw the line. I usually with my kindergartners, first graders, maybe even second graders, stop with quarter notes. They probably don't need to go any further than that because 1/8 notes gets to be quite tricky. So my 1/8 note starts out looking exactly like a quarter note, except now I'm going to put a little flag on it. And the opposite is true with the stem going down. Except the flag goes on the inside now instead of on the outside. So this is an 1/8 note, E-I-G-H-T-H. And it gets half of 1, which is a half beat. Okay, so the pizza concept works really well. I use that to teach everybody from pre-K all the way up through college students. We use pizzas. Again, you got to determine what your goals are, what's your plan for teaching these. If you're just using a couple motion exercises, just do maybe 1, 2, or possibly 3 of these things. But certainly don't go into 1/8 notes, okay? And we can go beyond this. If I cut my pizza again, this time I have to cut it a whole bunch of times. Now I got 16 pieces, and a 16th note looks exactly the same, except it has 2 flags. So this is called a flag. And a 16th note gets 1/4 of a beat, and you can keep going. You just keep adding flags to get smaller and smaller durations and keep cutting it in half. So lots of good math here. Tell you, if you're a math teacher and you're interested in teaching fractions, just a little bit of music like this really helps them, because it takes them outside of the math into something different they've never really studied before, and that makes them learn things better, I promise. Okay? Alright, so there's my rhythm notation, and all of this can be done on a rhythm staff, which looks like this. We only need 1 line on a rhythm staff because a rhythm staff just needs the rhythms. It doesn't have to go up and down in pitch. So the first thing I would do on my rhythm staff is to put in a time signature, and we'll deal with that here later. But basically I can put whole notes and half notes, I can put these lines and other things. So let me go ahead and introduce some of these terms which you've already learned, but just a review of them. Again, my long straight lines that I write my notes on is called a staff. So this is the staff, and it's just there for us to put notes on. This is a bar line. And a bar line chops up the staff into sections. And a section of that bar line is going to be called a measure. M-E-A-S-U-R-E, measure, because it's measure section, okay? Now, most commonly, each measure is going to have 4 beats in it. And so here you see I have a whole note of my measure. I can do another measure. I can put a half note, 2 half notes, or 4 quarter notes makes up a measure, okay? So that's how music would look with my notes on the staff. And a lot of times I do this more with my older students than the younger ones. The younger ones I'll do more interesting motion activities, but the older students, let them clap. Or give them rhythm sticks, just some sticks to hit together. You can even just buy dowels at the hardware store that are cheaper than the painted ones you buy at the music store. Alright, so if I were to clap this rhythm, and we're going to count to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's our whole note. We can do that over and over and over again. The next measure would sound like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I like to have the students keep their hands together until the next note sounds, so that they know that, yeah, that sound is supposed to continue. Or we could sing it. And do what we'd call a glottal stop on each note. You're kind of stopping the sound and then starting it again. That way they realize that, oh yeah, the sound continues for 2 whole beats here, 2 whole beats here, 4 whole beats here. Otherwise, when you clap, the sound is almost instantly gone, even though it's a whole note and it's supposed to last for 4 beats. So that's the problem with clapping. So singing helps. You can sing on a syllable, whatever you want to do. I'm also going to introduce you to the Kodai rhythm syllables eventually, and that'll be in a different folder. But they are really helpful in teaching students rhythm. And so be sure to watch that, because that'll give you some ideas on practicing rhythms with students. Okay, so there's our rhythm notation. The other thing we've got to do to add to this is the notation of silence. And silence is equal to sound, except there's nothing happening. But all of our notation units over here are the same, they just look different. So we call these rests. The rest is the silence in the music. And again, this is just review from what you've already learned in the education portal, hopefully. So our first one, we have a box. This is our staff line on top here. I've just shortened it. And this is always filled in. So I'm going to fill that in. And there's different ways of teaching these to students. I like to call this, it's a whole rest. So let me write that in. And this is tricky because the half rest looks exactly the same. It's just on the other side of the staff line. So let me go ahead and put both of these. All right. So our whole rest, you'll notice, is under the staff line. It's like a hole under the ground or in the ground. Okay. So if this is the ground, we have a hole underneath. And a hole that goes with that just fine. This one kind of looks like a hat. It's on top, but we wear a hat on top. And so a half rest, HA, starts both half and hat. So that's one way I do that. Some other teachers have come up with ideas like bales of hay and other things, which I can't even remember those things, but I use them a couple of times in my teaching as I learned them from other people. The quarter rest is tricky. It just kind of looks like a lightning bolt. If you want to get really nitty-gritty, you can actually teach them, do an M like this, and then turn it on its side, and that can work for a quarter rest. But I just kind of do a squiggly line, really works fine. And then the last one we're going to do is an eighth rest. And this one is a 7 with a fat nose. Whoops, that wasn't a very good one. Let's try that again. I hate using chalk. All right, so we have a number 7 that's got a big fat nose. That's our eighth rest. And these are all equivalent in duration. Half rest, half notes, whole rest, whole notes. Those are equal in time, okay, even though one is silent and the other is sound. So there's our introduction to the rhythm notation. Now I'm going to stop this video and start a new one with the pitch notation and let you get started on that. Here's the whole board. I'm sorry I kind of cut you off there on the 16th notes. But you can see it there at the bottom now, and I'll hook this onto the end of that video. Okay, there's one more thing we've got to do with rhythm notation. We've learned our values of our notes. We have our whole note, our half note, our quarter note, and our eighth note. The last thing we need to do is, if I say this has 4 beats and this has 3, this has 2 beats. This has 1 and this has a half. What about the spaces in between here? What if I need a note that's 3 beats? What if I need a note that's 1.5 beats? Okay, there's 2 ways to do that. The first way is to just connect these. If I put a little curved line and I can connect those, and now all of a sudden I have 2 of these hooked together, which equals 1.5. Or if I hook these 2 together, that's 3. But again, musicians are kind of lazy. We don't want to write so many notes. So we've come up with a system to add something to these to put the values in the middle. So if I have a dot in music, it adds half the value of that note. So if I have a half note and I put a dot by it, my half note is going to be 2 beats most commonly. So I add a dot adds half the value, half of 2 is 1. So a dotted half note, which is what this is called, gets 3 beats. So now I can say, okay, in the middle here, I have a dotted half note that's 3 beats. Okay? Let's do another one. Let's say we have a quarter note with a dot. So a quarter note gets 1 beat, and I'm going to add half of that, which is half. So the one that goes in between here is a dotted quarter note, which is 1.5. Okay? And a dotted eighth note would be 3/4. So, and I can also put dots on rests. Let's do this one. So, is that a half rest or a whole rest? It's above the ground. It's on my head, it's a hat. So that's a half. If I put a dot next to it, I have 2 + 1. So that rest gets 3 beats. Let's do this one just for fun. If I have a whole rest, it's a hole in the ground. That's 4. If I add a dot, I add half that. So a dotted whole rest gets 6 beats. And you say, well, wait a second. How can you have 6 beats when we only have 4 beats to the measure? There are time signatures where we have more than 4 beats. Or, for example, if I were in 3/2 time, and this is kind of getting ahead, but what I'm doing is I'm adding, I have 3 beats to the measure and a half note gets 2 beats, so basically this would equal entire measure in this time signature, okay? And you haven't talked about time signatures yet, but when we do, you can kind of think back to this and remember this. So that's how I create those in between notes, is using dots. And you can actually double dot a note, which does something different, but we're not going to deal with that because you don't see that too often. So just know that a dot